Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome back to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. As you probably saw from the thumbnail and the title of today's episode, I am joined by a guest today, and I'm happy to introduce my lovely friend Grace, who you guys may know as Filmoverload on Instagram, but also did you know she is one half of the YouTube channel Theoretically Horrifying. Hi Grace, thank you so much for being here on my channel. I'm so happy to have you here, this is so exciting. We've known each other for a few years now, haven't we? We've been friends on Instagram for about 2 or 3 years, but do you want to tell my audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So for those of you who don't know me, I run an Instagram account called Filmoverload. And if you go on there, you'll find all sorts of stuff about my work. I've written for Ghouls Magazine, Film Magazine, started a podcast with the amazing Alana called Theoretically Horrifying. So yeah, I hope you're fun checking it out.
Lovely. And what I will do is I will leave links for my audience to all of those things in the description box so that they can easily find you and your wonderful work. Because honestly,
Thank you.
check out her pages and her work. This lady knows her stuff. And she's also one of the sweetest people on the social platform. So check it out. Okay, so also excited about this episode because not only do I get to do it with the lovely Grace, but we are talking about quite a popular topic in horror, that of the final girl trope. And I don't know if you would agree, but I definitely feel like it's one of the most recognisable, well-known horror tropes. I think that you could maybe speak to someone who wouldn't class themselves as a horror fan, have probably heard this term at some point.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those widely known ones that everyone sort of kicks back and relaxes to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that part of the reason why it's so recognisable is because it's probably one of the oldest ones. If we look back at the 60s and the 70s, you know, the blueprint for the final girl was already being laid down. You could even say that Lila Crane in Psycho is still starting to be the blueprint. You know, she's, you know, the opposite of her sister Marion. So it's definitely one of the oldest, one of the most recognisable. But maybe we should just sum up and refresh our audience of what a final girl is, or at least what the classic original version, what we picture mostly as a final girl is. And I know that you are like me, you have dipped into Carol Clover's Men, Women and Chainsaws. If you haven't read this, guys, I will leave a link to it down below, or I'll leave the title of it. It's a good read. It's an academic read, so it's not for everybody, but it's definitely an interesting read. Have you got any other people that the audience could check out for more information? Any other books?
Yeah, so a big piece of literature that I think everyone should check out to do with women in horror is Barbara Creed, The Monstrous Feminine. Definitely recommend.
Excellent. So we will list all those down below if you want to expand your information on it. But basically through these pieces of work and, you know, just what we see through horror movies, the final girl is generally the main character of the story, isn't she? Even if she doesn't start out, she will become the main character. She's who we follow the story through. We often see things through her eyes. She's also often quite boyish, as Carol Clover calls her. She's often boyish in the way she dresses, has names like Stretch, Chris, Laurie, ones that are not specifically gender specific. I think this is to make her more identifiable or relatable to both a male and female audience. She survives. Usually that's one of the main things that a final girl has to do. She has the circuit at the end of the film where she discovers all the bodies of the people who have been killed. She's also quite intelligent, I would say. She's meant to be, you know, more intelligent than her friends. It gives her a moral superiority to them. She's often more aware of the situation that they're in. She's often trying to convince people that they're in a danger. I will mention that Carol Clover says that even though she survives, she says she's not necessarily a hero, that she can be a tortured survivor, an accidental survivor, or a victim hero. The accidental survivor is often, because the final girl doesn't have to defeat the villain to be the final girl, does she? We see often that she's, you know, aided and rescued by someone else, a la Laurie Stewart in Halloween with Loomis running in and, you know, saving the day with his 6 times. And also, what else have we got? No, I think, yeah, just looking at my notes, I think that's a pretty good...
Yeah, that's actually a really good, clean-cut one.
Yeah, have you got anything else to add about what our final girl is?
I mean, yeah, definitely the final girl is a figuratively holier-than-thou character who certainly uses her innocence as a weapon.
Yeah. I like that. And I think you've hit on a really important thing, because not only does our final girl usually have to survive to be our final girl, but that word innocence, because what else do we know, you know, very well about our final girl is that she's usually virginal, she's chaste, she doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke, she doesn't hook up with boys, and that ties into the morally superior than her other friends, who are often having a little drink or they're hooking up with people, and that, I think that leads to them being distracted, doesn't it? I think that's the point. They're not focused on the game.
Yeah, I mean, she's sober in every constraint of her life, not just with drink and alcohol.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I think that it ties in very well, or it's very similar to another character we see pop up a lot in the urban legends, which, as we know, are warnings, aren't they, for when the phrase the teen was developing, sort of in the 50s and 60s. Adults were scared because they didn't, know what to do with it, so these stories appeared as warnings to them. And again, very similar character, isn't it? We often see the virginal girl who's punished if she doesn't follow the chaste path.
Yeah, there's this whole play on moral panics within society, using as it's a bit like the boy who cried wolf. It's like all related.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know if you've seen my Truly Horror episodes, but they're some of my favourite to do, because you're looking into how the moral panic or the contemporary fears of our world play so much into horror movies and the characters in it, and I absolutely love it. I find it so fascinating. And my most recent one was the Black Christmas one, which is inspired by The Babysitter and The Caller Upstairs, and again, it's a warning story of the panic of the time. So yeah, really interesting. Love those. So, I mean, aside from the final girl being recognisable, she's also enduring, isn't she? And why do you think that this character, this role specifically, has lasted through so many decades? Why do you think that we need a final girl in our horror movies?
I think we all want to be the hero. And I think the idea of watching someone go through the pits of hell and back, seeing her friends mutilated, basically losing her innocence that she's weaponized herself, sort of relays the idea of catharsis. You feel gratitude for seeing it on screen and not having to experience it yourself. You go through it without having to go through it. It personifies evil on a screenic basis.
I love that. And I think, I mean, I don't know about you, but that's definitely one of the main reasons why I love horror so much, is that cathartic journey of, you can experience the fear and the terror, and you're just close enough to experience it along with the final girl. You're doing the circuit with her, aren't you? You're being chased like her, you're finding the bodies like her, but in the safety of your own home or the safety of a cinema.
Yeah, I mean, it's an individualized experience, but I think there is a general attitude that equipping oneself with the ability to tackle whatever they may perceive to be within these villains, like, for example, Leatherface is sort of a premise of familial trauma. Jennifer's Body, you could say she's tackling gender stereotypes. Whatever you want to perceive these monsters as, you can fight them through another person's agency.
She's kind of a stand-in for us, isn't she? It's a very... I keep wanting to say the word symbiotic, but I don't think it is that word. But it's a joint relationship between us and the final girl, isn't it? She's there to represent us and allow that journey. And for whatever villain it is, as you say, all those different... because each villain tapped into a different fear, doesn't it? Which is a topic for another video. But and I think it's interesting that you say we all want to be the hero, because we do, don't we? We want to know that if we face this monster, or if, you know, if we were in the same situation, we would survive like this person does. She's aspirational to us. We're meant to look up to her. But, you know, our final girl isn't perfect, is she, really?
No.
Is she always a hero? I mean, as Carol Clover says, sometimes she's accidental because other people do step in and help save her, whether it's the truck that Sally gets in at the end of Texas Chainsaw, or if it's Loomis at the end of Halloween. But sometimes our final girls, you know, they're not innocent by the end of the film, are they? They can, you know, become killers themselves. So, I don't know, is she always a hero? Is she always someone we should be rooting for?
I think this is the thing. Horror echoes a lot of socio-political messages, and within that frame comes sort of a harvesting of other energies. She, on paper, yes, Sally kills Leatherface. Not really, but figuratively, she kills the film at the end. She kills the existence of that narrative. But at the end of the day, she's still gone through all of this trauma. And then it's also interesting to think about her not being the hero. Is she still going to be the innocent virginal girl after the fact? Laurie, if Halloween 2, 3, 4, etc. didn't exist, how do we know she wouldn't go down a very dark path after Halloween, the first one? And it sort of plays on this apex of both the innocence of perceived femininity, but also how horror sort of dirties the water.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a contradiction, though, isn't it? I mean, I'm not the person to speak on this. I'm sure if, you know, people have really, really spent years studying it and got to the grips of it, they'll understand that. But to me, it seems like a blatant contradiction that the point is she's meant to be chaste and sober and virginal, but by the end of the film, she's usually committed, so, you know, some actions or crimes that change that, or through her experiences, through her trauma. What kind of person is that shaping that person into? So she doesn't end as this aspirational, chaste, sober, virginal person. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like a bit of a contradiction for me.
Yeah, it's like these, obviously, of course, Clover didn't translate it literally, but these tropes of a final girl, the virgin, the innocent, the never said a bad word to anyone, wouldn't harm a fly. By the end of the film, those cruxes have completely disparaged. So maybe is the final girl ingredients, just ingredients, but then the recipe is trauma.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is the word of now in horror, though, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yes.
Because we're going back now to a lot of these final girls that are our classic final girls, like Laurie, like Sally, and we're revisiting them and following how their trauma has affected them, which is interesting because, like you say, at the end of those ones, the originals, that, you know, wasn't the message necessarily, but now, oh yes, very much the word or the thing. It's just, if we're not having a horror film without a trauma in it, is it even a horror film?
Yeah, it's definitely a buzzword. It's a fun buzzword, but it's a very vindictive buzzword. It could be misused quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But I mean, that kind of leads us on to another thing as well, is talking about what we know is the classic final girl, but some of her actions at the end being questionable, but maybe validated because of what she's been led to. She's not, you know, going out and doing it for no reason, is she? She's often self-protecting.
Yeah.
But thinking about our final girls now, what we listed at the beginning of the episode isn't necessarily what we see now in our horror final girls, is it? We've had a bit of an evolution over the recent decades.
Certainly. Definitely. And I think that evolution has even further evolved, you could say, over time. So even back then, Carrie was seen as a final girl of sorts, even though she didn't fit the criteria at all. It wasn't a final girl / a film, but even back then she was seen as a final girl, let alone now seen as a final girl.
Is that Carrie White from Carrie?
Yeah.
I've not actually seen that one. I know of it. I know of the famous, prom scene, but I've not actually seen that one.
I really recommend it. It's good. It's not the best out there, but it's all right.
Because there's a few different interpretations of that one, isn't there? But would you recommend the first one?
Yeah, 100%. Brian De Palma, all the way with that.
So I know that you have a few thoughts on our more modern final girl. And I think, is it fair to say that perhaps our final girl has evolved with thanks to the Me Too movement?
Yes, I would like to think that with the rise that social media has allowed people to have voices, it has sort of evolved cinema, because cinema, as they say, life imitates art, art imitates life. It is very much a conscious genre, and it will copy and then manifest both ways. So it's quite interesting to see people, the Me Too movement has taken these horrible, horrible acts and rightly so, I want to point out, rightly so, villainized them, which is correct. So what that's done is then allowed an influx of these revenge films to come into horror, and then people to idolize the avenging female, which I agree with to a certain extent. But what do you take on that?
I mean, I have some opinions, but it's hard for me to really say set in stone, because I'll be honest, the revenge horror films like I Spit on Your Grave, Last House on the Left, and the more modern ones are films that I don't watch.
Yeah.
They're not ones that I want to sit and put myself through. I think that it can be an important message. It's something that should be spoken about. And horror is the genre out of all films that can break away from the blueprint and the constraints of what they're meant to follow and explore and experiment, and they can talk about topics other films can't. You don't get a buddy comedy, talking about these things. This is the platform to do it, and they're topics that need to be spoken about. But, horror is also meant to be enjoyed, and I don't want to put myself through that. But my concern with it, as with trauma, like we mentioned, and sometimes with mental health, is it's not just a case of, whack some essay in your film and some trauma and the message will come across. You can't just talk about, we saw last year, 2022 was the year of toxic masculinity films, wasn't it? You have some films that do it well and some films that don't. And so my concern is taking this topic, turning our final girl into this, avenging hero, and not doing it well and missing the point of the message they're meant to be talking about.
Yeah, it's almost like, let's equip a film with all these horrible topics that if you are going to mention them, treat them with respect and treat them with care, but let's just throw it on the screen to make people go, yay, that's so good for her. And it's contradictory. I mean, I myself am a fan of revenge films. I really enjoy them. What that has to say about me, I'm not really sure. But I understand a lot of people would prefer to not watch them, whatever, understand it as a no-no, which I think is completely fine. But what is happening now, as you said, 2022 being the year of toxic masculinity within films, by mistreating and propagating what it means, toxic masculinity, then the definition gets muddied, and then the definition gets diluted, and then where is the power in that?
Exactly, absolutely. And I think that definition as well is changing of what it means to be a strong woman. I've seen this new thing come through where to be a strong woman, you're not meant to lose your shit. Pardon me. You're not meant to cry. You're not meant to show emotion. You're not meant to be hurt. You're meant to be a badass. And I think that this, while it can be inspiring, because women can be strong and can be badasses
100%.
and do that. But I think it's also all right for women to go, I need help, I'm struggling with this, or to show emotion. I think it was actually Winona Ryder in Stranger Things. She responded, didn't she? People's complaint of Joyce Byers losing her mind and she's all erratic. And she was like, but she's allowed to be that. She's allowed to show emotion.
Yeah, I was literally going to use that as an example. That's perfect.
Yeah, because same with men though. Men aren't always supposed to be strong. They can be, weak, and it's the same, same with women. And I think often what we find in society, sometimes the needle flings too much far the other way.
Yeah.
And so our final girl has gone from this sweet, boyish, innocent, bookish, sober woman to, well, Yeah,
it's tiptoe. You can't tiptoe the boundaries of the spectrum. anymore. It is either, I'm not saying that there hasn't been a film in recent years that have done this, it's just one that I can't bring to mind. But in general, you look, for example, at the film Teeth. Have you heard or seen it?
No, I've heard of its notoriety, but I've not seen it.
Yeah, so I will not mention the gritty details, but the ending, spoiler alert, sort of validates the trauma that she's going to have to go through to avenge her bodily weapon. So for anyone that doesn't know, she develops teeth inside a rather intimate part of her body. That's a defense mechanism that will, that at the act of an unwarranted advance, she has the power to cut said bodily part off of a man.
Okay, right.
So what happens is she goes through this journey of discovery to do with that, because that's a journey and a half, and at the end of the film she seemed to have sort of created a power, used her bits as a weapon, and then she goes hitchhiking to escape this horrible town where all this assault has happened. She gets in a car with a creepy man who locks the door and it like smiles at the girl, being like, I know what I'm going to do with you, unfortunately. And then the character Dawn turns to the camera, breaks the fourth wall, and greets it with her own sinister smile. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, yay, she's going to have to like tackle down any man that mistreats her now. And I'm just like, hold on a second. To do that, she has to be attacked. That is not a good ending. That, I'm not saying it's a bad film, but that is not a happy finale.
I understand what you're saying. It's, she has to be put in that position first of all, to then have that, hey, you go girl moment.
Yeah.
I can't pull off you go girl, but you know what I mean, the good for her.
I'm not saying that it's not warranted. I mean, I'm a massive fan of that film. I understand it, and the message I understand. However, it's the public reaction of good for her that I don't completely align with 100%. I'd say I'm about 50% there, but not 100.
And that's fine. I mean, you can love a film and still find its faults.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be so defensive of there's no faults with this movie, or this is perfect, or this is trash. There's good in bad films and there's bad in good films. And I think it's good to look a little bit deeper, because it's also, I mean, maybe I'm getting a little too deep here, but I think we have a role as an audience to question what we're being shown and told.
Yeah.
And think, well, do I agree with the film or do I not? I can like certain bits but not other bits. So that's fine to love that film and think, that's not right. Because I do agree, like you say, to get that validation, she has to first go through that trauma.
Yeah, it's when you really get down to the musculature of horror, you can really start to pick apart the bones of it and then analyse, but then at the same time still appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And again, it's another reason why I love it, because it's so meaty.
Yeah.
There's so much to get into and talk about. But yeah, I mean, as far as our final girl has gone, she's gone on quite a journey to be this aspirational warning or blueprint of, you'll be rewarded if you behave like this, to now the opposite side of, you've got your voice and you can get revenge and you can be strong. A brilliant message, I do agree. I think that's better to say, use your voice than be sort of subservient like the original final girls were. And I'm not, again, we must disclaimer, we're not trying to generalize all films or all portrayals. I will say that I think a really good example of a final girl in modern horror that's done well is the final girl in Barbarian from last year, because she's smart, she is aware of the dangers that Keith could give to her. So she takes a photo of his driving license, of the ID, and she's cautious with decisions she makes. She's aware of what she can do as a female, and she uses her brains, but she's also caring. She goes back to rescue someone else, and she cares also a little bit about the monster as well. She sees things from their point of view, but ultimately survives, ultimately kicks ass. But it's that nice little balance point. So it's definitely doable. I'm not saying all films are doing this. Because, I just think that was a really good example last year.
Yeah, she was allowed to cry, but then she was also allowed to wield herself with whatever needed to get to the bottom of it. It was a really good balance. Like I said, it doesn't mean that every film has to have this tonal complexibility to it, but it is interesting to see inclusions of films such as Barbarian explore that alternative measure.
You know, the world is changing, and so our final girl is changing with it. But again, as we've said, you can't just slap this thing on and hope that it works. I mean, some people's complaints with the final girl in Men is that she was nothing more than her trauma. She was still as 2D as the original final girl, because now all she was trauma and nothing else. And you do need to find a little bit of a balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think Men is a really great example of a trickery within this whole argument, because my opinion keeps changing on it. I came out of the cinema and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, a 10 out of 10. I love that Harper was allowed to be, damsel in distress isn't the correct word, but it's the one I can think of right now. She was allowed to be that. She just got over the death of her husband. She's just seen this metaphysical, horrible, monstrous being in front of her. She's nearly been attacked God knows how many times. But at the same time, she wasn't anything but that. But then again, 2 seconds later, I think, well, it's a horror film. She's not going to be like watching Laurel and Hardy on the couch. And it's this really interesting thing of how different people relate to it differently.
Oh, 100%. And I would never say someone was wrong for disliking Barbarian or liking Men just because I'm the opposite way around. It's a personal experience. And our relationship with the final girl is a personal experience as well. I think that's why she was quite gender neutral in the beginning, so both audiences could relate to her. And, you know, that's a big part of it. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting because talking about final girls, old and new, talking about ones, you know, things we like about them. What are some of your favourite final girls, ones that you love and root for?
Right, so going back to the oldies, we've got Stretch from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Good choice. Oh, I love Stretch.
Yeah, I mean, I love Caroline Williams. She's such a ledge. And it's just something about that character and that film. It's like all-knowing. It's got like this humorous, omnipresent persona about it. And it's so symbolic, but not in an arty Freudian way. It's symbolic in terms of, right, all this work has been done about horror and women and the body and all that, and let's just run with it and see what happens. It's great.
It is such a good film. I can't believe I forgot about Stretch. I love the original Texas Chainsaw, but I only watched the second one last year for the first time. I love it. It's so different. But yes, Stretch is such she's a really good final girl to pick. I like that because she's financially independent as well, isn't she? She has her own job.
Yeah.
She's single and determined and adventurous as well. I think she has that adventurous nature. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, she's brutish, but at the same time she isn't meant to be this caricature of masculinity within the final girl.
Yeah, I think she still has that gender neutral name in the way she dresses, but she still has a mixture of femininity, as we see with Leatherface, bless him, little Bubba, he gets a little crush.
Yeah, she's just fully fleshed out.
Yeah. Hey, I like that. No pun intended. So who else would you choose?
So one that, well, at least I don't think many people know of is Yasmin from Frontiers, 2007. It's a French film.
Oh, okay.
It's
I've not heard of that
part
one.
of the new French extremity sort of movement, one of the latter films, and it's completely barbaric, ruthless, sinister film. It actually plays a lot on xenophobia within the themes of it, because it's about invasions and how this group has had to flee Paris with all the troubles going on there, mid-2000s. And they come in contact with this, a bit like House of a Thousand Corpses, with this unsuspecting family, and basically has to fight her way out, is to put it to the root of it. But she is brutal. But she still has tears in her eyes the whole time, if you know what I mean. It is not just a case of let's wield myself with a smile and crack on with breaking bones. It's like, no, I literally have to do this. And she is a bit like Stretch, fully fleshed out. She's very multi-dimensional, and I really recommend the film.
Okay. That sounds interesting. I hadn't heard of that one, but I mean, I like your description of her, so yeah, maybe I'll check that one out.
Cool.
Do you have any others on your list?
A couple of quick mentions. Of course, we've got Laurie Strode. I don't even know if I have to say anything about that. She's just complete OG. And then I've also got Ginny Field from Friday the 13th Part 2.
Another popular choice.
Yes, I really like how she subverts Jason with the whole mother thing at the end where she tries and tricks him. I don't know, I don't necessarily think it's her as a whole. I just really enjoy that scene and what it represents within the final girl.
I think it's really, really good. And one thing I like about Ginny that doesn't always get mentioned is not only how she handles Jason, but her love interest. He's older than her. He thinks that he can boss her about, move your car, you're late. And she still manages to maintain him. She manages to try and keep their relationship on an even keel and not let him just walk all over her. And I like that about her as well.
Yeah. And speaking of relationships within that final girl idea, my last pick is, do you know Sarah from The Descent?
Yes. Oh.
Because obviously that's to do with the fact that her marriage basically ended a bit drastically, and so that's why she's gone on this trip. And she is just the definition of just wow. Just everything she does. I mean, the way she arises out of that body of water soaked in viscera, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like that is a big no thank you, firstly. And secondly, you just think in a good go on girl sort of way, you really do root for her. It's what she has to go through is I hate it so much, the idea of the claustrophobia and the dark and these creatures. And to sort of, like we said in the beginning, to see that and to see her go through it, you're being guided symbolically by her hand through this horrible experience and watching her defeat it despite that ending.
I completely forgot about her, and I think that's because I watched that film once, never again, because I am quite claustrophobic, and that movie is insanely good, but insanely real, and I could not put myself through that again. But her journey, I mean, the pain and loss that she developed, I mean, no spoilers, but it starts with the loss of a husband, but that's not the end of it. She loses so much continually. And really good choice. Oh, I love those.
Yeah, she's a vehicle for power.
Yeah, definitely. I think she's a really good one. Oh, excellent. Well, if I had to pick some favourites, I mean, Stretch and Sarah, brilliant choices. For the classics, I would go with Jess Bradford from Black Christmas. Every time I rewatch that film, I have more appreciation for it and more appreciation for her character. I mean, she's played by the exquisite Olivia Hussey, which helps. But she's kind of an interesting final girl that she predates this blueprint that we know of. And she's the opposite. She's sexually active. She's an unmarried woman who's pregnant, but wants to be independent, doesn't want to settle down and marry. She wants to still follow her dreams. She's tough as well in her own way. She might not weaponize herself and I suppose she does, doesn't she? But when she knows the dangers in the house, she doesn't abandon her sorority sisters. She goes to get them. She's quite tenacious when the original girl goes missing, she goes and finds the boyfriend. She'll go to the police. She won't let it drop. And I think that she's an underrated final girl that is definitely admirable.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But my absolute favourite final girl is Sydney Prescott because, as my audience know, I love Scream so much, and I think that she, for me, we were talking earlier about a personal connection and relationship with final girl. She's the one that I identify with the most, and having watched her as a teenager, growing up with her, seeing her grow from a teenager into now a mother, it's been a really personal journey with this character. I find her so inspirational just on that personal level, but also how she subverts and plays with this role of final girl. She does sleep with her boyfriend Billy, and yet she still survives the film. So it's another aspect of Scream being meta and breaking these rules. And I know that a lot of people think it's daft that she's still the target all the time in these films, but I would be obsessed with Sidney Prescott too. So.
Yeah. Don't blame
don't blame
Ghostface.
them. Another one I'd mention is Ellen Ripley, because she is a final girl in my eyes. You know, those are horror films. Alien is a slasher film. It's a slasher in space. And I love that she is an example of one of these sort of gender neutral roles in the first film, because it was originally for a male actor and then they gave it to Sigourney Weaver. She becomes more feminine as it goes on, becoming a mother in Aliens, her role with Newt, but then she's also very sexual in Alien Resurrection, when she's kind of that hybrid. You know, she has that sensual side to her, but I just think she's a badass. And I think my favourite portrayal of her is in Aliens. To see the pure terror, but how she will still face her fear, because that's what being brave is, isn't it? It's not being afraid. It's being afraid and facing it anyway. Yeah. And that's what she does. And she's, you know, she's clever, smart. I just love her.
Yeah, she is unique.
Yeah, definitely. So we've said ones that we love, but I thought we could maybe round off this episode before we wrap up fully with a controversial topic, which I'm sure will annoy some people in the comments. But what is a final girl or two final girls that you think you don't like or you think are overrated?
So many people don't really like this one. Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's not that I don't like her. It's not that at all. But there's just something about her naivety during the first two acts that just get under my skin a little bit.
Okay, that's fair.
I mean, I understand. Craven did this in the opening sequence of Scream in '96, where everyone thought Drew Barrymore was going to be the final girl, and then Sydney. But he played out this idea of The Nightmare on Elm Street, everyone thinking it's going to be the other character, and then she dies later on. Obviously, it's a little bit more than the opening kill. It's a little bit further on. But then it really misaligned how I was supposed to identify it with the final girl. It's not that I don't like her. It's just something about it just didn't connect for me. And I can't pinpoint why it is, but I think that's quite telling in the whole final girl and spectatorship. We are the fact of alignment. If that isn't gelling, well, then for me they're not a good final girl.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fair, because it is that personal connection.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to love the same person, and these risks that they take of doing the old switcheroo or pulling the rug out, it's not always going to work. It worked in Scream, but it didn't necessarily work for you in Nightmare, and that's fine. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you've said a fan favourite as well, because I know people are gonna hate mine, but I think that Laurie Strode is overrated.
Ooh.
I know. I'm again like you. It's not that I don't like Laurie. Yeah. I think Laurie's brilliant. I think one of my favourite portrayals of Laurie is in H2O. I love that study of her dealing with what happened to her. But, you know, I think they make a really good point in Halloween 2018 when I've forgotten her name, but it's the granddaughter, and she's talking to her two friends, and the guy says, oh, so she just had, 3 friends killed? You know, I'm just saying, people have had worse things happen to them. And, you know, Laurie's great. She's a lovable character, but to have her up there on the pedestal as the best of the best, I think that she doesn't necessarily defeat Michael. She's very brave and she protects the kids, and I think that's great. But Loomis ultimately stops Michael. And I think that, you know, this trauma that she experiences and suddenly becomes Sarah Connor, she did just lose 3 friends, but we've had final girls who have had more horrific things happen to them. Yeah. So I think it's not Laurie that I don't like. I like Laurie. I just don't like this pedestal that she's been put up on. I don't think she lives up to that personally.
Right. I really, really understand where you're coming from with that. I feel like pedestal is a perfect word to describe a lot of characters' positions, to be honest.
Yeah. I think we glorify a lot of films and a lot of characters through our own love of them. Yeah, so I've probably lost 1,000 subscribers right now. But as I say, I love Laurie. I just don't love what people make her.
Yeah, you don't like the commodity that she's become.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, and if I had to add one more opinion, I would also say that Helen in I Know What You Did Last Summer should have been the final girl.
Yeah, Julie, oh my gosh, she gets on my nerves.
Yeah, I mean, she's great, I love her, but let's be real. Helen Shivers for the win.
Iconic. I used the word iconic about 30 times in one day on Instagram, but she is iconic.
Oh, she is. I mean, Sarah Michelle Gellar, need we say more? She's the absolute queen.
Exactly.
Her clothing, her character, what they did to her was a crime in that film.
I know. That literally was taxing on my viewership.
I could do a whole episode on that film, but yeah, that is another opinion. I think that Helen Shivers should have been the final girl there.
Fair enough.
Okay, so do you have anything to add on Final Girls before we wrap up?
I don't think I do, actually.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Grace, for coming on this episode. I've had so much fun doing this, and hopefully I'll be able to persuade you to come on again in the future if it wasn't too distressing for you.
No, definitely.
Good. So just a reminder, guys, I will leave a link for all of Grace's socials down below in the description box, and I would highly recommend you go and check them out. Her page and her content and her YouTube channel, absolutely brilliant, so go check those out. But yeah, this was so fun talking Final Girls with you. Thank you so much for being on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. So that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed joining Grace and I talking about Final Girls. Please let me know down in the comments below some of your favourite Final Girls, and maybe give me your Final Girl controversial opinions. Please be kind in the comments about our controversial opinions. I'm not sure what my next episode's going to be, but if you're not already, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on whatever wonders it will contain. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye, guys.